Hello, my name is Todd Gowers. I am a double bassist, and I am a professor of basses at Seattle Pacific University. Um, I've played in just about every group in the Seattle area, the greater Seattle area. I've played with Seattle Symphony as a substitute bassist. I was principal of Tacoma Symphony. I played in the Lake Washington Symphony. And I've also played on quite a few movie soundtracks. You may not know that Seattle is a really big hub for recording soundtracks to films. What I currently do until the pandemic hit was play bass for a lot of Broadway shows, tours that come through Seattle at the Paramount Theater and at the Fifth Avenue Theater. So that's what I've been doing. I teach a lot, I have a lot of great students. We never have enough bass players, so if you're thinking about playing an instrument, there are different sizes of this instrument that allow anyone all the way to, at the earliest age I've seen is a 4-year-old musician learning the bass. So don't let the size intimidate you. This bass is what we call a 7/8 size, and it's the biggest one that we use. There is no full size. It's a long story, but most people play a 7/8 and a 3/4 size bass. The history of the bass is interesting in that it's a hybrid of two string families. So the one we know the most is the violin family. And so it evolved from the violin family, but also another family of string instruments called the viol family, V-I-O-L. People still play those instruments, but they are less common. They usually have 6 strings, whereas the modern bass has 4 strings. The characteristics of a viol is a flat back, whereas on the violin, the back is curved. So some basses you'll see a curved back, some you'll see a flat back like this particular one. If you look at the corners of the instruments, you can see mine are pointed, and that's a characteristic of the violin family. You can also see basses that don't have this point, and there's just a corner without that sharp point, and that is a viol family characteristic. So it's really different from the violin, viola, and cello because of that. We're also tuned differently than the violin, viola, and cello. We're tuned 4 notes apart. My top string is G, then it goes to a D, and then next A, and the lowest string is an E string. Now you probably see this gizmo at the top here. This is called a C extension, and originally basses, I told you it was a hybrid between violin and viol family. The violin family is tuned 5 notes apart, and the bass used to originally be tuned 5 notes apart. Well, when parts got really difficult, especially during Beethoven's time, they decided to change the tuning and make it only 4 notes apart, which made a lot of difficult passages easier. Now, what happened when they did that is you lost 2 notes all the way down to C, whereas a bass tuned 4 notes apart, usually we have an E. But this, if I unlatch this lever here, you go down to a low C. And so this is called a C extension, and I can finger other notes, D, D sharp, C sharp, and open C, and that allows you to get those notes that originally the bass had. Now, I will talk a little bit about how the instrument works. And basically, it's a big wood speaker. You can think of it that way. What happens is if I either pluck, and that's called pizzicato, we use an Italian word for that. If I pizzicato the string, makes the string vibrate. The other way I can make the string vibrate is placing my bow, this is called the bow, which is made out of a Brazilian wood called Pernambuco. It's very heavy and lots of horsehair. That basically they give the horsehair tail a haircut. That's how they get the hair for that. And I take the horsehair, which has sticky substance called rosin on it, and that makes the hair stick to the string. And when I play, that also makes the string vibrate, just like plucking or pizzicato. That in turn makes this piece called the bridge vibrate, and the bridge vibration makes the whole front of the instrument vibrate. When the front starts to vibrate, there is a piece of wood that you can't see. It's a post. In fact, it's called the sound post. And it goes from the front to the back of the instrument, so that makes the back piece of wood also vibrate. So with all that vibration, there's a lot of air. This is all hollow. The air vibrates and comes out of these, which are called sound holes. And that it's just an old-fashioned speaker. That's how all the string instruments work. And what's cool is you don't need electricity for it. It works without any plugging it like a guitar, electric guitar. You have to plug into an amplifier and you got to have power. But with these instruments, you don't need that, which is pretty cool. Anyway, some other parts of the instrument, these are tuners, so I can change if my instrument's out of tune. I can make that, crank them higher or lower to change the pitch. Let's see, this is called a bib. I have a bib on here because you could probably see this part where it rests on my hip has gotten worn away. So after many years of playing, I've been playing this bass for 20 years. This gets worn away, and even I need a new bib. You can see that's kind of getting worn. This bottom piece is called a tail piece. That's where the strings attach. And this bottom little part here that's extended out, that's called an end pin. So that allows me to adjust the height of the bass depending if I'm sitting down or standing up, which you can do both on the bass. You can stand up or sit down while you're playing. There is a little wire here and a plug. That's a pickup, just like electric guitars or electric basses. I can plug this into an amplifier and make the instrument even louder for playing jazz or even rock music. One thing that's really fantastic about the bass, it's very versatile. You need it in just about any kind of music. Bluegrass, classical, jazz, rock. I've seen it in rock music. And being what's called a freelance musician, I get to play all those different kinds of music, which I really, really like. I don't like one type of music. I kind of like everything. And so it gives me an opportunity to do that. The reason I started playing this instrument was just by accident. I was a clarinet player in band, and I grew up not too far from here in Woodinville. And in 8th grade, I had finished growing, and I was as tall as I am today, which is 6 feet 4 inches. And they didn't have a small bass back then to start when you're younger. So the band director said, "Hey, would you like to play the bass?" Because I was so tall, and I was like, "Yeah, that sounds great. I'll give that a try." So it really was just because of my height, but that's a rare thing. Usually people don't grow to that height by age 13. I've been playing the bass for 43 years, and I never get tired of it. It's such a great instrument, and like I said, I'd highly recommend you trying one if you're interested in playing, because we always need more bass players, especially in youth orchestras. Okay, so parts of the bass. We'll start at the top. This is called the scroll. It's always very kind of ornate. Some scrolls have heads on them, carved heads of lions. I've seen a dragon once, people's heads, but mine is just this nice kind of cool swirl. This is called the C extension. That's in front here. These are called tuners and tuning machines here. This is called the neck. And the black piece of wood in front, that's called the fingerboard. On the sides here, we call these ribs. So these are the upper and their lower ribs as well. This front piece is just called the front. Of course, we got strings. We got 4 strings here. They're made of sometimes nickel, and the inside has silk. That's what these are. The bass bridge here, this is called the bridge, where the strings rest on. These are called the sound holes, also called F holes, because they're shaped like an old style F. And then this is called the bow, and the bow has this black piece is called the frog, spelled just like the amphibian frog. This is the screw. I can adjust the tension of the hair. This is just called the stick, and this is horsehair. So now I'm going to demonstrate the range of the instrument. I'm going to play from my low open C all the way to a really high note up here off the fingerboard. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to play a little bit of a piece actually written for the violin. When we play bass solos, sometimes we borrow music from other instruments because there isn't as much solo material written for the double bass. This is called Zigeunerweisen. It's a German word. It was written by a composer named Pablo Sarasate, and I'm just going to play a little bit of it so you can see how low and how high this instrument can go. So now I'm going to play for you a piece written for the double bass, and this actually is written for the entire bass section in a symphony orchestra. Usually there are anywhere from 6 to 10 basses in a symphony orchestra, and we all play this together at the same time, and this is called the Elephant. It's from a larger piece called The Carnival of the Animals by a French composer named Camille Saint-Saëns. And Saint-Saëns had a funny sense of humor, kind of a music nerd sense of humor. He quotes a couple pieces that depict fairies, tiny little fairies, to describe an elephant. And they're kind of obscure. The first one that you'll hear in the middle of the piece is a melody from a piece by another composer named Hector Berlioz called The Ballet of Sylphs. And sylph is spelled S-Y-L-P-H. And sylphs are tiny little fairies. And the original version of this melody is played really high in the violins, but it goes like this. That's the Ballet of Sylphs melody, but he gives it to the elephant. So kind of a goofy sense of humor. There's another part that also describes a fairy, and I'm talking about fictional fantasy character fairies, not the fairy boat. So the other type of fairy, I'm not sure what kind of fairy this is, from Midsummer Night's Dream by Mendelssohn, but the fairy melody in that piece goes like this. And that's played by the flute originally. But in this piece, Saint-Saëns gives those fairy melodies to the bass section and to describe the elephant. So here's how it goes. So that is The Elephant by Camille Saint-Saëns. And I'm hoping you could tell where those fairy melodies happened in it. So yeah, they're kind of a nerdy sense of humor the composer has. I thought I'd talk briefly about the name double bass. You notice I call this instrument the double bass. And the reason it is called that in the classical world is originally this instrument played the same exact music as the cello, which I'm sure you might have seen a cello, which is much smaller than this. And they play 8 notes higher than we do. So in the early days of classical music, we read the same exact music. But this instrument plays what we call 1 octave lower than the cello. Now, eventually we got our own special parts, but not back then. And the cello was considered a bass voice. And so this instrument was called the double bass, meaning we were doubling their sound an octave lower. So that's basically why it's called a double bass. But mostly you'll hear that if you're in a symphony orchestra, they'll call us the double basses. But there are lots of other names. You can call this string bass. You could call it acoustic bass. You can call it the upright bass, the bass violin. In jazz, sometimes they call it the doghouse. So there are lots of different names for this instrument, and you can just call it the bass also. So my favorite composer is Johann Sebastian Bach. And the reason he's my favorite composer is his music is beautiful to listen to, but it's also very, very sophisticated. He wrote 6 suites for the cello, and each of those suites has 7 movements to them. It takes about a half hour to play the whole thing, and we love to play those on the bass. It really helps us learn how to get around on the instrument because they're very difficult for the bass. The most famous one is the prelude to the first one, and you might recognize a little bit of this. That's just a little bit of that. It's a very famous piece. I started learning those pieces way back in 1984, and I never get tired of them because it's like a really, really great story that you could read over and over. It has so many different plot twists to them. So that's why Bach is my favorite composer, and I can play them by myself, and I don't need anybody to play with me, so that's really nice. So one really cool thing about playing the bass is there are not as many of us. So sometimes you get hired for a job where that's kind of unusual. And I've had a couple really great gigs. One we call a music job where you get hired to play. We call those gigs. And way back in 1989, I was hired to play in the Anchorage Symphony. I lived here in Seattle, and they would fly me up to Anchorage, Alaska, which is about a 4-hour flight. And my bass only, I didn't have what's called a flight trunk. There's a big fiberglass trunk that you could put these in, and they're very expensive. I didn't have one, so they had to buy a first-class ticket on the airplane for my bass. And the rule is if you have something like that, you have to sit next to it. So I got to fly first class every time I went to Alaska, and they always have really good food, and usually there was a steak dinner and a salmon dinner. And so I could eat a lot of food back then when I was younger. So I would have the steak dinner, and then I would eat the bass's dinner too, because we had bought, well, I didn't buy, but the orchestra had bought 2 tickets, and so I got to eat all that delicious food on that really long flight in really comfortable seats. I never get to travel in first class, and so if you play the bass, you might get hired to play a gig where you get to travel first class. That's pretty sweet. I've also played with the national tour of Mary Poppins in Mexico City, And that was really great. They picked an all-star orchestra, so they picked their favorite musician from every city on the tour, and so we all got flown down there, and it was wonderful. Mexico City is beautiful, and they put us in a 5-star hotel. We played in a 10,000-seat auditorium, and it was a wonderful time. We got to stay there for 3 weeks and see the pyramids. So the bass can really take you places, and that's one of my favorite things about this instrument. I hope you enjoyed this talk about the double bass and maybe consider playing it.